Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. I'm hoping you can see my screen. If somebody wouldn't mind doing a thumbs up in the chat or just posting just to confirm. I just want to make sure you can see my PowerPoint presentation and that you can hear me okay. All right, I think you can all hear me and see my screen, but if you can't, just let me know. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name is Vanessa, and I'm going to be talking about some advanced features in Qualtrics today, specifically how to use quotas and how to use our loop and merge feature. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know I am recording today's session, so if there's something you missed and want to go back over, or even if you want to share this with some colleagues that may also be interested who couldn't attend today, you'll get a follow-up email after today's session with a link to the recording as well as some helpful guides to get you started if you're not familiar with these two features in Qualtrics. I also have everybody on mute just to avoid some background noise, but if you have questions at any point during the session, please feel free to just put it in the chat and I'll get to it as soon as I can, probably closer to the end of the session, but I will get to it. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is what we're covering today. Most of the session is going to be about quotas because there's so much to talk about, but essentially quotas are exactly what they sound like. It allows you to basically put a cap or meet a condition in a survey, and then once the respondent submits the survey, your quota increments up. The other thing we're going to talk about is loop and merge, which I definitely wanted to add to this because it's such a handy feature that I've had to show a few people recently, and I thought it could help more people. But instead of having to create multiple questions that are all the same, when you have all of these different questions with answers that people may submit, you can actually have people who take your survey just repeat a certain block of questions instead of having to create it over and over, so that not only is the creation of the survey more streamlined, but so is the data collection when you finally analyze the results. So before we get started, I just wanted to say everyone is welcome to attend this session, no matter what your experience is with Qualtrics. But this session does assume that everyone has some knowledge of at least how to create a survey, as well as how to analyze the data. I won't be able to really get into how to create a survey. They're already going to be created in these demonstrations. So hopefully that's okay with everybody here. But if you do need some help with using Qualtrics, no matter what it is, I highly recommend the Qualtrics support site at qualtrics.com/support. I use it myself. It's really helpful, and I'll be sure to add this to the follow-up email that I send later on today. So let's do a quick intro to quotas before I go into the demo. So again, quotas are just what they sound like. If you need to gather an exact amount of data in your survey or your research study, you can use quotas to do that. Some examples on the screen are, let's say you need 1,000 total responses, or you have a particular question, a yes or no, let's say, and you need half of the responses to be answer A and half of the responses to be answer B. You can set up those conditions within Qualtrics using quotas. And there's two types of quotas we're going to show today in Qualtrics. One is a simple quota, and basically all you're doing is you're setting some type of target number, and then when the person meets that condition that you set and they submit the survey, then the quota increments up. So that's really important. If somebody takes your survey and they meet the condition, but they don't actually submit it, the quota is not going to increment at all. And then there's also cross logic. So this is really ideal if you plan on having multiple conditions and multiple quotas set. A lot of times, if you are in that situation, you may find yourself, if you're trying to do it through simple logic, saying, well, how many need to meet this criteria? How many targeted people need to meet this criteria? And it gets a little crazy in terms of the math. But with cross logic, you actually set up a big target number and then use percentages to figure out the rest of your condition. So Qualtrics is essentially doing the heavy lifting for you and doing the math, which is great. And then something really important to know about quotas is that you may actually go slightly over your quota. And that's because, as I said earlier, somebody has to meet the condition and actually submit it. So in a hypothetical situation, two people could be taking your survey. Maybe you're very close to meeting the cap, and they meet the condition and submit the survey around the exact same time. And then Qualtrics will calculate that and might show you that somebody has gone over your quota. It's usually not a lot of people that go over your quota, but it is possible. And you can decide what to do with that information. It's not the end of the world. You can keep it or you can delete it. It's entirely up to you. But it's really important that if you have a survey in where the respondents are incentivized in some way to participate it, like they get something at the end of it, and you're relying on quota data for that, don't do that. There are other pieces of information you could look at. If you download the raw data, you can see like the exact times that people submitted things. So just a word of caution if you're doing a survey like that and plan to use quotas. And then really quickly, before we get into our demo on loop and merge and quotas. So loop and merge, again, ideal if you want to take respondents through a survey and have them do questions multiple times without having to actually create all those questions over and over and over again. So hopefully I'm explaining that correctly. You'll see it in the demo. But when you use loop and merge, there are a few things that you should be mindful of. So when you're using loop and merge, I kind of imagine a roller coaster like I have on the screen. So when you're in the loop, the person can go through the questions as many times, as many loops as you need. But once the loop is over, they have to move forward on the cart. Like they can't go backwards into your survey. And then when you turn on loop and merge, so it's a feature you can turn on and off. If you turn it on in an already active survey that's already collected information, it's going to delete information that you already collected. So please be sure if you plan to use loop and merge that you don't really use it in the middle of a survey that's already active and collecting data. Try to plan for it before you add it to your survey. Same thing if you turn off loop and merge in the middle of a survey that's collecting data, all the data that is part of the loop will actually be deleted if you do that. So again, be really careful. Try to set it up first before you throw your survey out in the wild and let people actually take it, test it, make sure it works, and it should be good to go. So really quickly, I'm going to stop sharing and move into my Qualtrics account. Give me 1 second. And if you have any questions on what I just talked about, feel free, but hopefully the demonstration will actually answer those questions. All right, so you should be seeing my Qualtrics account now. Let me just double check. Yes, it does look like everyone is seeing my Qualtrics account, but if you don't see that, just let me know. So we're going to go through a couple of examples of how to use quotas first. So this is a very simple quota test. And what we want to do in this scenario is I've just got a few blocks here. One is an intro block. It's just text. It's not, Qualtrics counts it as a question, but it's not actually a question. It's just saying, tell us more about your experience at our office and answer the questions below. And I've got 2 questions. One is, what is your age? And then how would you rate your experience? And in this scenario, let's say that I want to implement a quota on the number of people who can answer within a specific age group, right? So the way I can do that is to access my quota builder, which is here on the left-hand side. So in this navigation field and this sidebar on the left, you'll see a few icons. And the quotas are this icon that looks a little bit like a speedometer. And if you hover over it, you'll actually see the word quotas pop out. So let's click on that. And I have no quotas right now. This is entirely new. And if I wanted to add a quota, I could obviously hit the big button right here in the middle. And there's also a button here on the side. So I'm just going to hit the big blue one in the middle. And I've got the 2 choices that I talked about earlier. I've got simple logic and cross logic. Let's start with simple logic first. And that's, again, just setting a target number and then setting up a condition that somebody has to meet in order for my quota to be fulfilled. So let's create it. And first, Qualtrics is saying, what are the conditions? And there's also here at the top something that says new quota, and there's a fraction up here at the top. So the new quota is just you need to name whatever this quota is. And that's super helpful. I highly recommend naming your quotas, especially if you plan on having multiple, so you don't get confused. I'm going to call this age group 18. And just for the purposes of this survey, I'm going to set my target of a very low number to 3, so it's easier to see how it works when I test it out. And then let's work on the conditions. So increment the quota when a response is submitted that meets the following conditions. And I can have a drop down here. I can set my quota conditions to be based on a question within my survey on embedded data. So I'm not sure how many people here have used embedded data in Qualtrics. That could be a whole other session, so I won't get into it too much. But if you are familiar with using embedded data, you can use it as a condition of your quota. And you can also use another quota that you created to be a condition in a quota. So you can use a quota on a quota on a quota if you wanted to. But right now we're going to keep it simple and we're going to base it on a question. So if the question, what is your age? Let's say it's 18 to 29. That's the first group I wanted to do. And is selected. There are other options you can use, but let's say it's selected. That's my first condition. If I wanted to, I could actually add to this with some Boolean operators and create like a condition on top of a condition that they both have to be met, or one or the other has to be met in order for the quota to be fulfilled. In this case, I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to delete it by hitting this minus symbol. And I can also separate out multiple quotas by doing add logic set, just so it's a little easier to see. And if I don't want that anymore, I can hit the minus symbol right there. I'll keep it super simple right now. So we have the condition. They have to select this age group. And I've got 3 people in this condition, 3 respondents. And then I have to tell Qualtrics, well, what happens in the survey if this condition is met, if this quota is fulfilled? So I'm going to expand my quota options. And there are a few options that I can choose from here in this dropdown. Most of these are self-explanatory, but I do want to explain a couple of them because they sound similar. So do not display question and do not display block are pretty self-explanatory. If a condition is met, then a question that you select or a block of questions you select, they just won't show up in the survey anymore, right? Website feedback actions, I don't think that's actually activated in our account. Don't worry about it. But you have end survey and prevent all new survey sessions. So the difference is for end current survey, if somebody meets the condition within the survey and you're at cap, then Qualtrics immediately kicks them out of the survey. It redirects them out. And there is a note that Qualtrics gives them saying, oh, we've met our cap. I mean, it's a lot nicer language, but thank you for submitting, but we have enough responses. And you can actually customize that message if you want, if you select it. You can see that right here. The difference between that and prevent all new survey sessions is if somebody's in the survey and they're taking it and they meet the quota and you're at cap, they won't necessarily get redirected. Qualtrics will let them finish it. But anybody new who tries to take the survey they'll be not allowed to take it at all. And there will be a message on screen explaining why they can't access it. We've reached our limit. Thank you very much. And that's it. And you also have none. So I'll show you how this works later, but none basically tells Qualtrics, at least within this quota frame that you've set up, don't do anything if the quota is met. This allows you to use different logic within Qualtrics, other features to do your own survey flow and customize it how you need to. And I'll show you how that works in just a bit. But you can also see if you're over quota, you can decide to keep the information or delete it entirely. In this case, it doesn't really matter in terms of a new survey because I'm not going to demonstrate that, but I'm just going to prevent all new survey sessions and be done with it. So there is my first quota and it's set up, and I'm going to go back out into my default quota group. So there's my first one. And I wanted to have different quotas for all of the age groups that I have in that question. So just to make life easier, I'm going to hit these 3 dots on the side of my quota. And you can see that I can duplicate it if I want. I'm going to go in there, double click it, and I'm just going to rename it age group 30, which is the next one. Change the answer that they have to give, But the quota option should be the same. I have the same target at the top. I could change it if I want to, but it's also prevent all new survey sessions. And I could go back out into my default quota group again and add as many as I want in terms of quotas for this particular survey. You'll notice too that if I click these three dots, I can also edit the count of how many people have taken the survey. So if I want or have met the quota, so if I want to delete them or reset it, I can absolutely do that. And I can also edit the target at any time that I want as well. If you make these changes, you'll need to publish your survey again, just so Qualtrics adds them to your active survey. You can also move the quota up and down in terms of priority, and you can reset it anytime you want or delete it. If you have a survey that you plan on having open for a long time, let's say an entire year, and you need to reset the quota maybe every month, so 12 times. Does that mean you have to go into the survey every month and reset the quota manually? No, you can actually schedule it right here, and you can determine month, quarter, or a range and have a start date and the number of periods that it resets, and the quota will reset automatically. Less lifting for you to do. It's handled by Qualtrics. So I have these quotas set up. I could do more, but just for the purposes of getting through the demonstration, let's see what it looks like when somebody actually meets the quota. So let's preview the survey. And just a note, if you test and preview a survey to test the conditions of a quota, Qualtrics will count that as meeting the quota. So when you make the survey live, be sure to erase all of the test data and then reset your quota just so it's back to 0. So it doesn't, meet the cap so quickly. So here's the beginning block of just with the text, and we're going to move on, and we're going to pick this age group, 18 to 29. This, I'll just say I'm extremely satisfied with my experience. And there's a survey. It is done. So what happens now to my quota? If I refresh this page now, let's give Qualtrics a minute to think. So I put in that I was age 18 to 29 in that age group. And you can see this little meter here saying that somebody has taken it and one person meets the quota count. And there's like a little bar there so that you can see some visual progress of what is going on. If for some reason you are doing this survey as part of like a big group and multiple people need to know about the quota or keep tabs on it, you can do that without having to give everyone access to the survey. If you go into your default group right here, there's actually something called a public quota dashboard that you can activate. Mine is already activated, and you can view it. And you can just share this link with somebody and they can keep tabs on how the quotas are doing. If they need to, they can even download the data about the quotas. And this doesn't provide back-end access to your survey. They can't change anything about your survey. They don't have access to the actual data that they can, manipulate and stuff like that. No, this is just a real-time dashboard of how just the quotas are doing in your survey. Let me click out of that. So, okay, I've got these two groups here. Great. I've set up these quotas. What about a situation where in this survey, I don't really care about how people answer, but let's say I just have a cap on the total number of responses. Let's just say I need 100 people to fill out this survey. So how would I do that? I mean, if I don't really care about how they are answering. So there are a few ways that you can do it. Like I said before, we're going to add another quota here, simple logic. And I'm going to call this one total responses and give it we'll keep the cap at 100. So again, you could do this in a lot of ways, but something that I personally like to do is I base it on a question. But if you'll remember, I had that text block at the very top. That's not really a question, but Qualtrics counts it as one. So I can actually select that. And there's not really a choice. It's just text. But if it's displayed and somebody submits the survey, it's always going to be displayed, right? I have no logic in my survey that says hide this block of text if somebody's doing X, Y, or Z. It's always going to be displayed. So this condition is always going to be met so long as somebody goes to the link and submits my survey. So if I make that the logic and then give it, an action to do, maybe it ended the survey, it doesn't matter. But when somebody just takes the survey, submits it, this quota for total responses will be met. So that's one way that you can fulfill the quota for that scenario of just total responses in general. If you have any questions about these types of simple quotas, just let me know. Feel free to put in the chat. I am monitoring it. So let's look at a different scenario. I'm going to move over to this survey. And this is a question I've been asked a lot. This is a fake registration form. And let's say you have an event and somebody, or let's say you have an event, there's 3 days that this event is happening. I have April 1st, April 2nd, and April 3rd. And let's say you have a cap on each of these days. Let's say you can only have 20 people each in these. I'm going to just put a very easy cap of 1 so you can see what it looks like. But how would you do that with quotas? So let's go back. And we're going to add a quota. Simple logic again. And my condition is going to be for that question, which session would you like to attend? April 1st. Actually, I'm going to call this quota set April 1st. I'm going to give it a cap of 1 just for the purpose of the demonstration. You selected, okay? And the quota option, we're actually going to make this none, just so you could see why you would even select this, okay? So we're telling Qualtrics, if this quota is met, don't do anything. Why? All right, so let's go back into our default quota group, and we're going to duplicate this. We're going to do double click in here. We're going to do one for April 2nd and change the date and make sure it's none. Yes. Okay. Go back, duplicate it one more time. And we'll do April 3rd this time. Okay. All right. And it should not have any action to take if the quota is met. So why would I do that? So what I want to do in this case is, if I meet my cap for April 1st, I don't even want this to be an option anymore that people could select in my survey, right? I don't even want to entertain the idea that multiple people could try to join. I'd be over quota. And then I have to go back and like tell people, sorry, you can't attend, and make it kind of a mess for me. No. So what I can do is actually add my own logic on top of the quota so that this option disappears from the survey if the condition is met. So if I go into my answers here, I can actually add display logic. So the logic I want to add is, if the quota of April 1st, the one I called April 1st, has been met, or rather has not been met. There we go. Yeah. If the if the quota for April 1st has not been met, then I want April 1st to still display on the screen. Okay, same thing for April 2nd, although we're going to use that quota, and April 3rd. So this is basically just kind of a weird puzzle that you have to figure out the logic for. All right, so if these conditions have not been met, if these quotas have not been met, the availability of those dates will still show on the screen. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to test that out too. So let's pretend I'm a person registering for this. My name doesn't matter in this case. I want to go to the April 1st session. So let's select that. Cool. All right. Qualtrics took it. There were open spots. Great. Remember, I had a quota of 1 just for the purpose of this demonstration. If I restart this survey, you'll see April 1st is no longer available. I cannot choose it because the quota was met and I added display logic on top of it. So the only other dates that are available for me to go to this session are April 2nd and April 3rd. And the person taking it now doesn't know April 1st was an option, so they can't choose it. So that's one way you can create quotas and combine it with other logic features in Qualtrics to just kind of customize it and do whatever you want, and kind of do some fancy logic there. One more example of quotas is cross logic. So this is for really complicated, different types of quotas all mixed together, and you kind of want to save yourself, from going crazy with your conditions. So I've got 3 blocks here. One asks if somebody's a New York resident. One asks for their age group and another asks for their marital status. So let's say I need 50% of people saying yes and 50% of people saying no for the first question. That's my first cap, right? My first quota. But let's say I also need quotas for what if they're an NYC resident plus they're 18 to 20 years of age plus they're married. I need another cap and another quota on that. And if they're, if they are a resident and this age group and this. So there's like so many permutations of how many, if I had to do this through simple logic, I'd have to do dozens upon dozens of conditions. And that would be very cumbersome for me to put together and to figure out the math based on what my main target goal is. So if we go into our quotas and add a quota here, we can try using cross logic, which is not based so much on target number as it is percentage. So we'll create a quota and let's just call this total responses. It doesn't matter. And let's give it a really big cap. Let's say 1,000 responses total. But out of those thousands of responses, I want to do the first set, yes, and I only want 50%, okay? And 50% of the no's, all right? So I've got that percentage set up, right? Let's add another logic set on top of that, another set of conditions that have to be met in addition to this. So let's say, I think the second question had 5 different answers. Just to make it easier myself math-wise, we'll just do 20% of the age group question. We'll pick this, and we'll just go down the list and do 20% of each of these. Obviously, you can make this whatever percentage that you want. And the last one, and then one more logic set. We'll also do 20% because I think there were 5 answers if I'm splitting this evenly. For the different marital statuses I also had. We'll do widowed. And I'm just clicking this plus button on the side to add these different conditions down the list. All right, so I've got everything set up. All I did was add percentages. I didn't give them targets because I just have this big one at the top, right? And I can set my quota options of what happens if these conditions are met, just like I did before. It doesn't matter in this case. This, however, current respondent breakdown, that's new for cross logic. And if I open it, you can actually see that Qualtrics is doing the heavy lifting. It's saying out of 1,000 responses, if somebody needs to meet all of these conditions, it's going to be about 2% of your respondents, which is about 20 people. So it did the heavy lifting for me. It's doing the math. And if I'm not satisfied with that number of responses, I can always change it from here, or I can fiddle with numbers up here. It doesn't matter because Qualtrics will just end up reconfiguring the math so that it makes sense for what you need in that particular study. So hopefully how you do cross logic, hopefully that makes sense. But if you need me to show anything again, feel free to put it in the chat. So that's how quotas work in a nutshell. There's different ways you could set it up, and obviously I can't go through them all, but all you have to do is think about what is my target and how can I make that happen? How do I do the conditions? And just set it up and test it out in the preview so that you can make sure it's working like you need it to. And one more thing I wanted to show, it's not related to quotas, but I still think it's useful to streamline your surveys, is loop and merge. So as I said before, loop and merge is a very handy way to have people repeat different questions in your survey without you having to actually duplicate those questions and then use some kind of crazy logic and survey flow to get somebody through it, okay? So I have this survey here. I have 2 blocks. One is, it's kind of like a faculty assessment. We do have a tool that actually does that, but this is kind of an older scenario that I put together that I think still works for the purpose of this demonstration. So let's say I'm asking people to assess some faculty that they worked with during a particular time period. They have the option to select more than one of these doctors. Dr. No, Dr. House, Dr. Quinn, Dr. Strange, and Dr. Lecter. You may have heard of them. And then there's this block here. And depending on who they pick at the top, I want them to just repeatedly go through just this one block of 2 questions, right? instead of me having to do a separate block for Dr. No, and then loop them there, and then a separate block for Dr. House and loop them there. No, just go through this. I don't want to create all those questions over and over again, right? So this is where loop and merge comes in really handy. So to activate loop and merge, you have to go to a block and find it here on the side. So make sure if you're using loop and merge, you associate it with a block, and you can add blocks right here. But just in terms of thinking about how to set it up, you have to add it to an entire block. So if you only want to, go through certain questions, they have to be separated out from the rest of your survey. So loop and merge is right here. I'm going to click on it, and you've got to turn it on. So that's what I'm going to do. And you can loop just by typing in information here on the side. But in this case, it makes sense to loop that block of my survey based on the first question, right? So I'm going to select the first question. Which faculty members have you worked with this quarter? And I've got a few options here, but the one that makes the most sense is what they actually selected, right? They could go through all the choices if I wanted to. They could go through it 5 times and answer for each person. But in this case, I'm giving them the option to pick which faculty they worked with. I'm going to do selected choices. And then Qualtrics automatically puts those choices here in field 1. So in field 2, I could add other information pertaining to each of these physicians. Maybe I could ask people about the courses that they were part of, that these physicians were all a part of. I could just type it in manually if I wanted to. And then I can pull that data if I needed to, as I'm going to show you in just a few seconds. But for now, I'm just going to leave it the names of these physicians. I can randomize it if I want, but I'm not going to do it in this case. And I'm just going to hit save. So now I have another problem. They will loop depending on who they pick. So if they pick 2 doctors, they'll loop through it twice. But how are they going to know who they're rating? I can't change the name manually. I have this placeholder here. How would you rate blank's professionalism? So to input the doctor's name in that blank, we're going to use a super handy tool in Qualtrics called pipe text, which is right here. And all pipe text is it's a very handy feature that takes information from somewhere else in your survey, you tell it what to grab, and then it kind of slaps it in wherever you want. So in this case, I want to tell Qualtrics, I want to take the doctor's name from up here, whoever they pick, and slap it right here in this placeholder. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to highlight it, delete that. We're going to go to pipe text, and you can pipe text from a lot of different places. You could see I could pipe it from different survey questions, dates and times, random numbers, lots of things, even quotas. But in this case, I actually want to use the loop and merge, and we're going to go to the fields, and we only had one. Remember, it was the doctor's names. So I'm going to select that one, and Qualtrics puts this little code right here, and you don't have to worry about the code. The person taking the survey is not going to see the code. All the code is, it's like just a signal to Qualtrics saying, put this information here, right? And we're going to do the same thing to this one, to this placeholder. Pipe text, loop and merge, that field. So let's see if it actually works. We're going to preview it. Always preview your survey. All right. So which faculty members did you work with this quarter? Let's say I worked with 2. Let's say I worked with Dr. House and Dr. Quinn. Okay. So since I picked 2 doctors, technically I should be going through the loop twice. So let's see what happens next. Aha, so the pipe text worked. How would you rate Dr. House's professionalism? Because I picked him first, right? And I know as a survey taker, this is who I'm rating, right? So, I mean, I don't know if you guys know Dr. House, but he's very unprofessional. He's super rude, and it's terrible working with him. So I'm doing extremely unprofessional. How would you rate Dr. House's quality of teaching? I mean, he's obviously very intelligent. He knows a lot of things, but he's a bit unethical in his methods. So maybe I say somewhat bad. All right. So I've rated Dr. House in those 2 questions. I technically should see Dr. Quinn next. So let's see if that's what happens. So perfect. How would you rate Dr. Quinn's professionalism? So now I'm rating her. And in the data, that's what you'll see. You'll see a column specifically for Dr. Quinn with these answers that I'm about to put. So Dr. Quinn's pretty professional. I really liked working with her. She's a pioneer medicine woman. And how would I rate her quality of teaching? Well, I mean, some of her methods are outdated. Maybe it's neither good or bad. So this should be my second and final loop. So what happens now? The survey's done. I didn't have another block afterwards. So the two loops happen and then I merge with the rest of the survey, which is just the end. So that's how loop and merge works. And I find it to be so incredibly useful just in terms of making your life easier when creating a survey. You know, especially when it comes to data collection, if you had several blocks with the same question over and over and over again with this crazy logic, that ends up showing up in your data as well. And you'll have like a million bajillion columns with information that might not even be filled out. But in this case, the data becomes more streamlined as well. And if they just answer for Dr. House, that's who shows up in your data. So, and you don't have to, spend time making a million questions. So that's how the loop and merge function works, which I kind of just threw in there because I thought it was really useful and hopefully you find it to be useful too. So that is my demo for quotas and loop and merge. But if you have any questions, we do have some time, about 10 minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Vanessa, I'm so glad you found that help. I think you were talking about loop and merge, but hopefully you found it all helpful too. Are there any questions or anything you'd like me to go over again? I'll give it a couple minutes in case somebody's typing. And for anybody who came in late, I am recording this, so I do plan on sending the recording of the whole demonstration. And, I'll be sure to send, there are really useful KBs on using quotas, very thorough ones on using quotas, and loop and merge as well. There are lots of different scenarios that Qualtrics will provide as examples, and hopefully those scenarios will help you when you're trying to do your own surveys. Oh, I think somebody raising their hand. Let me find you. Who is that? Oh, Suzanne. Let me find you, Suzanne. Give me 1 second. Suzanne, you should be able to unmute if you would like.
So this was really, really helpful, but I have a question. When we did that big survey,
Mhm.
and you put it like the introductory text as the quantifier,
Mhm.
what if somebody opens the survey but doesn't answer it? Does it still count?
You're talking about the one where it's just text. And
Yes.
so Qualtrics recognizes that a text block that doesn't have a way to answer it is just that. They don't have to answer it. That's why the option that came up was just that it's displayed, right? They can't answer it. There's nothing to answer. But if they see it and they submit the survey, if that's what you're making your condition, then it
Yes.
still
Okay.
is fulfilled. So they don't actually have to interact with it in any way. As long as it just pops up on their screen, that condition is fulfilled. So it's like a kind of like a nice, useful trick to meet like a total responses quota without actually having them have to input any information.
Okay.
I see a question from Jonathan. How does a loop and merge look when getting an export of the data? So that's a good question. I can actually send an example of that in the follow-up email. I'll look for a demonstration that I've done. But essentially what happens is you'll see the two questions in the data export, like in Excel, for example, and you'll see the two questions. If somebody picks Dr. House, you'll see a note in a column that says, this is for Dr. House. And it shows you all the information in the loop that has to do with Dr. House. So you'll be able to at least separate that physician out and look at data only pertaining to him. Hopefully that explains it, Jonathan. But if you have more questions about it, let me know. Okay, perfect. Any other questions that I could help with? Or anything that you'd like me to show again? I'm happy to re-demonstrate anything that I've shown. Or if you've got maybe a particular scenario that you're thinking of for a survey of your own, a use case, I might be able to help if I can think of it fast enough. And if we don't have questions, it's okay, because if you have questions afterwards that you think of once we end the session, feel free to just reply back to the email that I send out. I'm really happy to help as best I can. And if I can't answer it, I definitely know where to redirect you so that you can hopefully set up your survey the way that you need to. It doesn't look like we have more questions. Hopefully this made sense. And the reason there are no questions is because I explained it well, hopefully. But again, if you do have any questions after this, please, I'm happy to help. You'll have my email when I send everybody the follow-up details. So feel free to reach out. And if you have, any other questions, reach out. And if not, have a great rest of the day. Thank you for taking some time to learn about some advanced features of Qualtrics. And I hope it makes your survey creation a lot easier. So have a good rest of the day.